Hello and welcome. Happy Monday. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lucy Charlotte Nichols. I am a quantum coach and trauma awareness trainer and consultant. So the reason why I started this YouTube channel is I wanted to find a way of delivering more longer form content, because obviously when we have the TikToks and we have the Insta Reels, they're very, very short content. And so people don't really get to know me, get to know how I think. And so this is the opportunity for that. So welcome here. So today I'm going to be talking about how your negative experiences shaped who you became. So in this episode, I'm talking about how we went from our innocent perfection when we were born. Yeah, so when you're a baby, you're perfect. You know you're perfect. You're not doubting yourself. So how we went from that to, if you're living in a survival identity, developing a limited, restricted perception of who you are and what you're capable of. So at the beginning of your life, as I've said, you are perfect, you are whole, and this is the truth of who you are. This is your real self. And then life began to happen to you. So as a baby, you thought of yourself as perfection. Like an animal, you were completely in tune with your body and your needs. You communicated everything you experienced, needed, and desired because you weren't thinking about it. But over time, as you develop self-awareness and through your experiences and interactions with others, in particular your primary caregivers, you started to have experiences that made you begin questioning yourself, and you began to lose touch with your body, your perceptions, and your instincts. Sometimes maybe you cried and no one came, or someone came but seemed annoyed. So you began to feel that your needs were inconvenient. And over time, these experiences mount up. Maybe as a child, you went to a relative's house one day with your family and you felt overwhelmed and a bit uncomfortable. So you stayed quiet. Later on, your parent might have commented on this. Why were you so quiet today? And they seemed annoyed about it. So rather than them thinking about you and your experience, for example, by saying, I noticed you were a bit quieter today. Did you feel a bit uncomfortable? Showing empathy and curiosity, they seem to be judging you. And so again, you experience shame, not about what you did, but about who you feel you are. And the more toxic and repeated these experiences are, the more these experiences begin to impact how you feel and think about yourself and the world. If you're bullied, you experience rejection and you interpret it as meaning, I am flawed, there's something wrong with me. Because other people are in your class, maybe your friends, and they're not being bullied. So the automatic and on the surface logical explanation is that you have something wrong with you that these other kids don't have. If your parents neglect you in any way, regardless of intent, if they don't meet your needs, not only to survive, but to develop in a psychologically healthy way, you don't have the understanding as a kid to think, these people are limited. They're behaving in a really unhealthy way. What you do is, as a child, particularly because children are by nature egocentric, internally you feel the lack, you feel what's not happening, the needs that aren't being met, and the meaning you derive from this situation is there must be something wrong with you that is causing this situation. And so you develop strategies. We're always developing coping strategies and they're always subconscious. So if you're being bullied, what may become your wish, your desire, is that because right now being seen is you being seen as flawed and undesirable, you begin to desire to not be seen. So maybe you start to desire not being noticed. So on a subconscious level, you begin trying to create this for yourself. Maybe you stop speaking in class. Maybe you start sitting at the back of the classroom, where in the past you might have enjoyed reading aloud. Now you no longer volunteer to do this because you don't want to be noticed. And so what happens in this process, you begin to fragment and lose parts of your identity, parts of yourself that brought you joy. Maybe you stop raising your hand in class to answer questions, even though you know the answers. You start to dread your teacher putting you on the spot because that draws attention to you, and being the center of attention has been framed by your brain as negative and a dangerous experience. And so you begin shrinking as a person. And our expectations become shaped by our experience. So if we've been shamed and bullied in one school, this is what we begin to expect in the next school and later on in college. We are developing an identity of ourselves as being less than and inferior to other people. And so we've not only learned to repress parts of who we are to be more palatable and acceptable. By learning to not express who we are, we now actually distance ourselves from the people who would relate to us because they're not seeing who we actually are. They're only seeing this watered down, shrunken version of who we are. So this then stops us meeting our real people, our tribe, and this then again causes us to feel more alone, more isolated, because we feel people don't relate to us. And we're wired as humans to solve problems. If you had, as I did, a parent who is often volatile, unpredictable, who maybe blames you things you now realize were obviously not your fault, such as she drops a glass while talking to you and openly states that you made her do it, then the strategy you develop is hypervigilance. I need to over-attune to other people to placate them in order to stay safe. Maybe you start trying to be good all the time, not realizing that this isn't normal. Maybe if you got attention for getting a good grade at school, you develop a strategy of achieving in order to ensure some of your needs are met. Because as a child you have needs to grow and survive, in addition to food, clothing and shelter, you have needs for love, you have a need for emotional attunement. You need to see healthy disagreement, healthy repair after conflict. And quite often the people who are raising you don't have these skills. But as a child you don't realize this, and you're just subconsciously trying to have your needs met. And the strategies you develop and the beliefs and ideas about yourself, other people and life are developing like a little map of highways in your brain. When you observe, if I say something slightly out of turn, I might be shouted at or physically hurt. I'm psychologically shamed, and this happens over and over again. This becomes how your brain is wired. And like well-worn tracks in the snow, or like a scratch on an old record, our brains operate by taking well-worn shortcuts, so these ideas and beliefs become part of us and begin to feel like our identity. So if you're ostracized by your peers in school, then develop this hypervigilance and anxiety that then actually makes you more socially awkward because you're not relaxed, you're not feeling confident, you're overthinking everything, then you actually become more likely to become rejected and shunned in social situations, which further cements this idea that this is actually who you are. In terms of ability, maybe we had some type of invisible disability that made it hard for us to learn. Maybe because we weren't relaxed socially, we weren't actually able to learn. Then we begin not learning at the same rate or with the same ease as our peers. But we don't have this knowledge, this understanding. All we have is our experience. I'm finding this really hard. And so what do we conclude? We're not learning because we're less able, because there's something wrong with us. When really, the conditions we needed to learn effectively, to feel safe, to feel nurtured, to feel able, weren't there. So once again, we've developed a conception, a misunderstanding about ourselves that limits us. So in the future, if there's maybe something we want to do, we might doubt that we're able to do it. Then someone we know also wants to learn this thing, and they've had a different idea a different experience, they think to themselves, learning is easy for me, I'm going to learn this thing, and they do. You conclude that they've been able to learn this because they are in some way superior to you, which further feeds into your ideas and beliefs about yourself that you've come to believe are your identity. So I hope this has been helpful in understanding how you developed the idea of who you are, but also made you consider the possibility that some of the ideas you have about yourself are definitely false and are limiting you. If this is the case, I want you to maybe begin to consider a belief that you've been holding about yourself and think how this might actually be false. Okay, thank you. Peace out. Stay blessed.